If you're looking for a cheap and flexible Heroku alternative to deploy and manage all of your personal projects, then you need to use Dokku. Dokku is a Docker-powered mini Heroku that's free to use and takes care of all the underlying infrastructure, so you don't have to write a single line of YAML to configure an app with Postgres and Redis. It's a lightweight platform as a service that runs on a single server, so you can self-host it wherever you want. In fact, let's set up a project with it. Dokku is easy to set up on a Linux server from any cloud provider, but it's easier to set up with DigitalOcean because it provides a Dokku image in its marketplace. So we'll spin up a droplet, change the region, click on the Marketplace tab, and search for Dokku. Then we'll change the size to regular, and we'll pick the $6 a month plan with 1 GB of RAM, since that's the minimum requirement for Dokku. But if you're hosting multiple apps or even data-intensive apps, then it may make sense to increase the resources. Then we'll pick an SSH key or create a new one, and after that we can create our droplet. Once that's done, we can visit our droplet IP address, and we should see this Nginx welcome page because Dokku installs it by default. Let's SSH into our droplet to set up Dokku. We'll add our SSH key so we can git push from our local machine straight to the Dokku server. And then we'll need to give Dokku a base domain for all our apps. I'm going to be using the droplet IP address because I don't have a custom domain to use, but if you use a domain, Dokku has a Let's Encrypt plugin that automatically retrieves and installs certificates. Now that Dokku is set up, we can create our app. We'll be using this Node.js Getting Started project from Heroku, which has a proc file that Dokku can read because it uses Heroku-ish behind the scenes, which automatically detects and builds your application using Heroku build packs. Let's clone this project, install the dependencies and run it locally to see what the project looks like. Then we'll go back to Dokku and run Dokku apps create and the name of our project, which can be anything you want. This command will create a new application container, set up Git hooks, and prepare the Nginx config. We can view all our projects with this command. On our host machine, we can add a Git remote to Dokku with our IP address and the name of our app, and then we can run git push Dokku main to push our project to Dokku, which will run all the steps to build our app just like in Heroku, and at the end it will give us the URL to our app. Now, I'm actually not the biggest fan of this URL format. If I wanted to, I could run this command in the Dokku server to change the port to 80, which would mean I won't need to use this port. But I'd much rather have a subdomain with the name of my app, and Dokku supports this using virtual host routing, which lets you run multiple websites on a single server. But that doesn't work out of the box with an IP address. So I can add nip.io to my IP, which adds wildcard DNS functionality, which will allow for subdomains on IP addresses. So if I enable vhost for my app, this gives me a subdomain that will work in my browser. This also means that every new app I add to Dokku could have its own subdomain. In fact, why don't we add a Postgres database to this project? We can install the Node client for Postgres, then we can set up a Postgres connection in our app, along with an endpoint that connects to that database, and we'll create a page that renders data from it. Back inside Dokku, let's install the Dokku Postgres plugin, which will allow us to create a new database called Nodes database, but this can be whatever we want. And then we'll link our database to our app, which grants all the permissions, sets the database username and password, creates a database URL environment variable, and makes sure the database starts before our app in case the server restarts. We can then open the Postgres CLI and create a new table called test table with some data that says subscribe to BetterStack, which you should totally do. Then we can double check our table exists, which it does, and we can check if there's data inside it. So if we commit the changes in our app and push to Dokku, then visit our app in the browser and go to the DB route, we should see the data coming from our database. How easy was that to set up? And because Dokku is based on Docker, you can use all the Docker commands to inspect and get all kinds of information from running containers. Dokku also provides zero downtime deployments and has a bunch of other plugins like this one for Redis and this one for MongoDB. Basically, if you want to deploy a personal project, an internal tool, or maybe even a production app, and you don't want the complexity of Kubernetes or you want a lightweight version of Cap Rover and Coolify, then maybe you should try out Dokku.